Well, good morning to SDSU's Crop Hour today. Thank you for all attending. I hope you're all keeping warm. Winter's finally sent in a little bit. Today, we have Dr. David Karki. He's going to speak about some of the minor agronomy issues centered around oats. And I will be talking a little bit in the middle about nutrient recommendations for oats as well. Then at the end, we will have our open session for discussion centered around this topic or any topic that you have that we can help you with. At the end of the session, we will be sharing the QR code. There will only be one QR code for today's presentation. With that, we're nearing the 10 o'clock time frame. We're getting a number of attendees coming into the room. Just want to kind of stall out here just a little bit, but I think we could get going. So with that, we're going to start out again, as I mentioned, Dr. David Karki. He's the agronomy field specialist in our Watertown Regional Center. David came to Extension in 2015, I believe it was. Maybe I've got that wrong, but has a lot of experience working in South Dakota with the couple of the breeding programs, the soybean breeding program and the spring wheat breeding program, and worked with Dr. Peter Sexton at the Southeast Farm on some things as well. So we're glad to have David on our team. So David, are you ready?
Yes, let me get my microphone and video started, and I'll start sharing my screen.
Thank you, David.
Hope everybody can see my screen.
Looks good.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here this morning for our third day of our Oats Week. And thank you, Anthony, for a nice introduction. Actually, I came to SDSU Extension in 2014, so it's always longer than you think. I don't know if it's good or bad, but yeah, thank you for the introduction. Like Anthony said, the more or less about first half of the presentation today would be a lot of small agronomy topics, and the second half of the presentation will try to focus more on nutrient management, more specific, and nitrogen management, and some plant growth regulator that we have tried in our trials. So, and these agronomy topics that I'm going to show you, or I'm going to talk to you about, is more of a, I would like to call this producer driven. These are the questions that I have gotten in last few years about oat production in the state. So we decided to have this general agronomy, talk on oats today. So here is the graph that I made from acre planted, harvested, and since 2015. And if you see the orange line, that's lesser than the planted blue line. So where does the rest of the go? So here the percentage of plant, harvested percent from the planted total acres that we have in our state. But if you see a graph, look at the graph, then I will. So 345,000 acres planted in 2015, 310 again planted in 2020, which is the two highest number of acres that we have planted in our state. And harvesting wise, 140 in 2020 and 145,000 acres in 2015. So what this shows us this is we had the best production year in terms of area planted and harvested since 2015. And in 2020, last year, we ranked #1 in total production. 10.7 million bushel grain oats were harvested last year. And even the years in between 2015 and 2020, we've always ranked, second, third, or fourth, along with other major oats growing, states we have in the nation, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. So we are located in this prime oat growing region in the country to produce good oats and meet the demands that we have out there. So first thing when I think about agronomy, and crop production is to get a good variety or the best variety out there. And I don't know how many of you were yesterday at Dr. Kleinjohn's presentation. I think he talked in detail about how the variety performance trials and variety performance program works in our state. But I found this very interesting. This is a snapshot of something I found online. And this got published in 1914, more than 100 years ago. And at that time also, we had the culture or the tradition of trying different varieties or different strains or genotypes to compare among each other. And the title of this book says, Some Varieties and Strains of Oats and Their Yields in South Dakota. And this is published in 1914 by Manly Chaplin. So this is the numbers that we have from that book. And this is just for an example. So you have an average of 7 years average from 1906 to 1911 in this column right here. And these are the varieties tested in your far left. So you have average highest bushel for this particular variety was 40 bushel was the highest one and 17 was the lowest one. And now this is a snapshot of 2020 variety trial result that Dr. Kleinjohn puts out on our extension website, and then he even prints out the hard copies. So this is 2020. And something to note here is 3-year average, you have the highest yielding variety Dion at 115, lowest yielding Shelby at 76 bushel. The importance of variety selection is not choosing the best variety out there. You're already starting a wrong foot because you have the difference of 76 versus 115 to begin with. So this is just to show that there's big importance of growing any crop out there is to get a good variety or hybrid that's available out there for us. And another thing, usually I get a question on oats, is about planting time. When can we plant oats? Is it okay to plant in a cooler soil versus other crops? And it's always, oats is a cool season crop, likes to thrive and grow all of this vegetative, production when climate is cooler. And that means in our situation in South Dakota, earlier the better. And in a minimum germination, I would like to stress this. This is a theoretical, textbook number is 35 Fahrenheit. That means it could germinate in the soil, but also would do better in a slightly higher temperature of 40 plus. And like I said, planting early provides that cooler climate for maximum tiller and panicle production, so that the plant can thrive better in a cooler climate and also avoid that heat in July, which can hurt your yield and test weight and some of the grain quality parameters. And seeding time, it's a kind of, I would like to call time rather than date because it's always a timeline range of time that's good for any particular region. I would say something around late March to late April, moving from south to north in South Dakota. So that brings another question is what's the seeding rate? And this is something that's I would call it old data, and we like to say 1.2 million live plants in the field to get the optimum yield for not only oats but other small grains as well. But not many recent studies have been done around here in our environment, at least in our region, upper northern northern plains, in recent times. Maybe this 1.2 has gone to 1 million that we can assume it probably has, but there's no data to support that argument. And depends on the seed size and the number of seeds per bushel. And growers I've talked to multiple growers who like to produce oats in annually, every year, anywhere from 2 to 3 bushel. But one study I found that's done in North Dakota State at the Carrington Research Center, in 1998, and they tried, you know, uh, 0.75 million, 1 million, and 1.25 million, you know, and the study did show that 1.25 did better in terms of grain yield compared to two other lower rates. However, so I'm going to move seeding. I just mentioned that we don't have many seeding rate studies, but our oat breeder, Dr. Melanie Cafe, did a seeding rate study, not in our conventional production system, but in organic production system, and it's just 1 year's data, and that was tried in Madison, South Dakota. And 3 different varieties were tested in this trial: a Saddle, Sumo, and Reigns. And rates used was 1.2, 1.6, 1.9, and 2.3 million seeds per acre. So your lowest rate is the actual, the standard 1.2 million was the lowest rate, and then others were the higher than normal that we want to call higher normal. And it did not show any significant effects, statistically significant, effects on grain yield. But two of the 3 varieties did show significantly better test weight and ground coverage for higher seeding rates. So this is something to keep in mind, that maybe there's a chance that we were going to increase the test weight by increasing seeding rate. But this is 1 year's data, and this is an organic system. We can always try in the other, our regular conventional system as well. And of course, higher coverage is good for weed management. So, higher seeding rate could be beneficial for weed management in organic production system. And few other in-season management decisions that we have to make, in any crop production, including oats. And I'm not going to go into detail in this particular slide because we had Paul Johnson, our weed program coordinator, on Tuesday, and Dr. Emmanuel Biamukama yesterday talked about diseases. So, but still, I would like to reiterate a couple of things. When planted early with optimal seeding rate, oat can be fairly competitive with weeds, and one thing to keep in mind is there are numerous broadleaf herbicides labeled for oats, but at the same time, we cannot compare everything that suits for wheat will also do okay with oats. That's not always true. So that's something to keep in mind. And there is another enemy of oat is wild oats, its own pedigree, and most effective way to rotate it is to control wild oats is to rotate the crops that allows controlling wild oats. And that's the only option we have because we don't have any selective herbicide that will only kill wild oats. And diseases, crown rust is the most economically important disease or pathogen we have, and there are labeled fungicides, and fungicides are applied at flag leaf stage. I think Emmanuel talked about this yesterday also. Flag leaf is the critical time for applying fungicide for crown rust. And there another one is barley yellow dwarf, vector by cereal aphids, but not as economically damaging as crown rust. And we'll move to now harvesting. Usually straight combine, but there are folks who like to do swathing also, especially when there's uneven ripeness and abundance of weed. Then swathing at about 30-35% grain moisture is considered ideal. But if you're harvesting it, ideal moisture is 13 and a half. But I have also, we are in this, but weather is not always cooperative. So we have to sometimes go out and do our job. So I have, growers who have harvested, successfully at 15%, but anything above that would be a little risky. And for storage, 13% is ideal, again, for about 6 months or so. But for long-term storage, lower the moisture, better the shelf life for storing oats like any other grain we have. And so next one here is grain quality. I would like to spend a few moments in this slide with the interest from our millers, General Mills, grain millers, and some of the millers we have in the region now are contracting oats um, from our field. And there is certain grain quality for food grade, and then also there is a quality for livestock feed and quality for forage. And oats is a multi-use crop, and a lot of times, there could be grain and forage at the same time. Same variety can be used for that. But when we talk about food grade and milling quality, we're always looking at grain density that is higher test width, the better. And screening percent means if you run a grain of oats in certain screen size, how many will fall through. So that'll give you an indication of how much thin you have in one given sample. So that plays a important role in food grade and milling. And also growth percent. That's what's the percent of a whole grain after dehulling. So after you take all the hulls out and dehull the seed, then how much full unbroken seed we have percent wise when you compare to the one with the husk on. So that's the growth percent. And you can see a picture here. I would consider this a growth, dehulled seed. And seed composition, we all know oats is one of the healthiest grain we have out there. We have protein, starch, lipids, fibers, minerals, and these are common to all grains. But oat does have that, dietary fiber called beta glucan, which makes oat healthier than other grains, other grains that we consume. And FDA actually came out and approved beta glucan to be helpful in reducing cardiovascular diseases back in early 2000, late 1900, early 2000. So the beta glucan that we find in oat grain, oat seed, is labeled or approved by FDA for preventing cardiovascular disease. That's an important statement. And if we're thinking of livestock feed, again, where you market your oats, livestock feed can look at lignin percent or oil content, for race horses. So those are the things could be considered critical component for livestock feed. And another one that we use oats for quite a bit, almost half or even more than half oats that we grow or plant are harvested for forages. And if you're talking about forages, we always have to look for total biomass or total dry matter content, and also crude protein, a nutrient detergent fiber, acid detergent fiber, relative feed value, and some of the other forage quality parameters that we have to look and try to get that quantity versus quality balanced so that we get a good forage out of it. And so whenever I got forage question, there's nothing to look at, and then and data wise, but again, Dr. Melanie Cafe, our oat breeder at SDSU, started a forage trial in 2019. Sorry, 2019 in few locations across the state. And these are the locations that's been used in 2019 and 2020. Maybe John presented this yesterday too, but I would like to show at least a couple of tables for you. And this is just to let you guys know that we have started this. And if you're looking for some information on dry matter yield and some other forage quality numbers, that we have started this, and you can always go to our extension website to look for the publications. So this table has a lot of numbers. And again, like I said, these are the varieties and genotypes. If anything you see with the numbers, they're not released yet, so they don't have their name yet, but they're to the point that they're very close to being released. And here is the dry matter yield. So this is a ton per acre basis. So there is a difference, not much, but there is a difference quite a bit on other quality parameters too. So so if you have any questions on forage, variety or forage trial, forage numbers, we are trying to move forward with doing this consistently in an annual basis so that we can have a good idea about good grain, high grain yielding versus high forage yielding, and maybe we can have a variety that will do both equally good in both situations, and we can call it a dual purpose variety. So that's our ultimate goal. And another interesting paper that was published in 2019 that I found, that's from Dr. Abur at Kansas State University, did a forage trial, and of course it's Kansas and Western Kansas. The numbers don't probably reflect what we can get here, but it's still the trend of forage yield. You see forage yield on your y-axis here in a vertical axis, and you have soil N plus the applied N, and although it shows kilogram per hectare, and which is pretty similar to pounds per acre if you want to do a calculation that way. And this study, his crew did a study on both N rate and seeding rate on the same trial. And seeding rate were used were 48 pounds, 66 pounds, 80 pounds, and then N rates were 0, of course, that's a check, and then 10, 30, 50, and 78 pounds nitrogen per acre. So this one would be your check right here. And dry matter was kind of going up for a little bit, and then I would say plateaued somewhere around here. So nitrogen could be somewhere in about 75-ish to have that optimum forage dry matter yield in Western Kansas. And another important fact that I would like to share here is seeding rates had no effect on dry matter yield or nutritive values. This is very interesting, I found. Maybe we can repeat this experiment and see what we can find here in our environment, but at least in this paper reported that there is no, for these seeding rates studied, there is no significant response to the yield. Another thing I thought it was interesting is nitrogen increased crude protein, which is expected usually, but decreased ADF and NDF. That means it's making better quality forage. But it did plateau like it did for dry matter yield, in either direction. So if this was to ADF or NDF, this curve would look like start from here and then go down a little bit and then plateau somewhere around here. So this graph itself it's interesting. That's why I wanted to share this. And another big topic out there right now is oats or small grain in rotation. How does it do? When somebody wants to go away from your corn and soybean rotation and bring small grains in a cool season crop in your rotation, how does oats do? And it fits really well in corn and soybeans, and fits better if you do after soybean. But I have had producers who have grown fall in corn. People don't like to do follow wheat in corn just because of the head blight issues, but corn, oats don't have that. And there are some reports that when you have small grain or oats in a rotation, you can get up to 15 to 20 bushel bump in the fall and corn crop, and 5 to 8 bushel in soybean crop. And there's a graph, and Anthony will talk about it in after a couple of minutes here. And also another thing that oats can provide you is after harvesting, either you harvest for forage, early in the in summer, or after grain, still we can get out and harvest oats maybe late July, early August. Give ample time for cover crops, and livestock incorporated producers have enjoyed that window, that seasonal window that oats provides quite a bit. And we all like to talk about cover crops these days. So if you have a lot of thins or anything you miss when you're harvesting, and you're planning to do for cover crops following your oats grain crop, and producers have used that volunteer oats as a grass component in a cover crop mix that follows the crop. And another thing that we have recently started hearing about is something called AMF, or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and oats are known to enhance the fungi population in the soil, and that fungi does a lot of good work to the crop that it's having the relationship with. So AMF forms this beneficial association with plants grown in the field, and it does mostly with all plants, even weeds. But the matter is, how much colonization will it get? And that colonization, the rate of colonization can differ in different crops depending on what kind of association it can form with the plants. And oats is known for better colonizing these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi than other crops that we grow. And you can even see arbuscules even inside the root hair. So it does, the association is not only outside, it actually inside, and it almost forms that elongated root hairs so that it will help extract nutrients and water better than not having them. And high presence of AMF indicates good soil health, and that's known and documented out there. And this is something that's a very last statement on my slide. You can read that. Corn on completely fallow ground. If you have a prevent acres and weeds were growing, you kill that weed and then the ground became fallow. And if you follow that ground with corn the next year, and you may see phosphorus deficiency, although you had enough phosphorus in the soil in early seed or in a young seedling in corn, that is believed to be due to lack of AMF and AMF population in the soil because you had fallow the previous year. And Dr. Lehman and his crew at Brookings USDA ARS experimental site did a study in 2009 and 2010 and looked at AMF population in November after following with different cover crops, and those ground were planted to spring wheat and oats. Spring wheat and oats are harvested and followed with cover crops and different species of cover crops, and looked at the population in November. So you can see oats had pretty high graph here, and the mix which had oats also had this bar graph as taller. And this almost shows that there's none. That's check, of course, but in canola, canola and brassica species may, looks like it's not supporting AMF growth. That's what it's showing me, but oats does do that. So this is canola right here. The C has to be here, and so just wanted to share this. It's the 2009, 2010. It's in our environment, and done in Brookings. And maybe Dr. Lehman will elaborate this particular study in next week when he talks about, microbial activities in the soil. And again, oats as cover crops, we always talk about, we would like to look at roots all the time. I have heard, a lot of people saying, underground, but a lot of times this underground part is so hard to see and so hard to assess what's growing and what's not growing. So this is my kind of little pit project that I had in 2013. The intention was to grow different oat varieties or lines, and then see if we can grow that in a sand-based culture, sand-based soil, or sand, very heavy sand medium, and in a beverage cups, and then feed liquid food all the time at all times, and then at certain growth, can we dump everything on a big bucket full of water, and get the whole plant out to see the roots? And you can see horsepower had more root mass than gopher, and there could be oat varieties would have different root mass than the others. Maybe this is something to explore down the road. And cover crops, this is a study that I was involved in a few years ago. I don't want to go back to this, this on the left, when you see this 34, 34A, 50, those are seed coatings. And we use that seed coating in different cover crop species that were tried that year. And then, so these were in corn, hand broadcast in corn plots. And when corn was about, physiological maturity, I would say about first week of September. And these notes were taken in late October, early November. And oat does have that capability to have that adaptability, because number of plants per plot, which were 10 foot wide by 20 foot long plot, had this many oats plant, this many pea plant, this many lentil plants. This was in Arlington, this was in Crooks. So, and if you want to grow something in July, I have also seen oats doing better than other small grains. So later in the spring, so oat does have that very wide general adaptability. Something to keep in mind. So this is the plot that I had those numbers taken from. I believe this is from Crooks. You see these oat plants growing. Here are the flags, marking my plots. So that's why the plants number of plants were counted that year. I think this was in 2015. So I'll let Anthony um, kind of talk about a few slides here from and I'll stop talking, Anthony. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you, David. Yeah, we, as you know, Jack Davis isn't in the Oats Week this week to talk about oats marketing and economics because it is such a specialty type market. Like David said, a lot of it's for seed and there's food grade and there's feed and all of those things. But one thing we wanted to share was the economics of growing oats. And so, David, if you want to throw that table up there. We just kind of got together with some of our acquaintances that we knew that grew oats and came up with some ballpark figures, of course, kind of as a general consensus. And so seed there at 2.5 bushels around $20 an acre. I think that may be a little high this year. I found out a quote yesterday, $7.50 a bushel. So that may be just slightly a little high. Fertilizer there, of course, we would recommend establishing a yield goal and coming up with recommendations there. But this is a 50-30-30-10 as sulfur, $45. Broadleaf herbicide, $12 applied. Of course, David mentioned the crown rust is so important, so we'd assume we'd want to apply that. So at $12. You can get insurance on oats. It's kind of a minimalistic type coverage, but it does cover a multi-peril type situation. So $5 on insurance. Equipment is difficult. It doesn't take as much equipment to grow oats, but we put $40 on that. Fuel with no-till practices at $8. That could be a little high, maybe not. If you're going to store your oats, we figured 125 bushel yield there at 8 cents a bushel, so $10. Trucking, 125 bushels at 16 cents. Thinking that maybe you would go to a food grade type market. That 16 cents could be a little low. A lot of times millers will quote you a price and just come pick it up for that price. So the trucking may not even be a valid point in this graph, but we put $20 in there. Land is a difficult one, depending upon where you're at, of course. But in this scenario, we put $200. So we kind of wanted to set up a worst case scenario to kind of make it look a little bit better than it is in the end. But you could look at that a couple different ways. So $372 total expenses. At 125 bushels, the break even would be $298. I have heard some quotes from millers this year at $350. So definitely an opportunity to make some money this year on oats, I think. If you address some of those other issues in the list, we can do a lot better than that. Then the straw, a lot of questions about straw. We wouldn't like you to continually remove crop forages from fields because of organic matter and now carbon. Carbon's a big deal. But 2 tons of straw there at $90 a ton, $180. So you could use that to really improve your profitability of oats. And then David's going to talk about plant growth regulators here after I get off. And 12 ounces of that is right at $18. So he'll discuss how plant growth regulator works and the effects on the oats. So I think there's some opportunities to put oats in. Obviously, if your land rent isn't that high, I think there's even more opportunities. So anyway, we can go to the next slide. David mentioned this rotation effect. A number of years ago, way back now in 2006, we were talking about rotations back then for some reason, and I did a literature review. I love doing literature reviews. This study here has 56 site years of data. I looked for publications that had rotation evaluations and number of years of soybeans in a row stacked on top of each other. Of course, those publications had to have a corn-soybean rotation as well. And so what I came up with is the art of this is to come up with one graph that summarizes everything that you want that literature review to show. And this may be just a little bit difficult to understand, but my 100 line is I converted all of those yields on a relative scale compared to the corn-soybean rotation, the yield of soybeans in the corn-soybean rotation. So that would be 100. So while those points that are on that 100 are not the corn-soybean rotation yields, but the line is indicative of what the yield was for soybeans in the corn-soybean rotation. So, and then I had to figure out, well, how do I show yields of plots that were beyond 1 year of soybeans in the rotation? And so I did that with the 1 there. So that would be at least 2 years without soybeans in the rotation, the 1. So that could be 3 years without or 4 years without. I had to lump all those together in that 1 category. So at least 2 years without soybeans in the rotation there, indicated with the 1. We've got about a 6% increase in yield from the soybeans. If we stack soybeans on top of soybeans, so that would be the 2 years in a row, we lose about 5% yield of those soybeans. And we move to 3, we lose about 10%. And at 4 and 5 years, it's about 13%. So while we're not talking about soybeans today, we're looking at the impact of a rotation. And David mentioned the importance or the option of putting oats in your rotation. Realizing I used this in the wheat week as well, because wheat could be put in as well. So oats is one of those important crops that would hold a place in our rotation. Of course, all of our pest folks have talked about pests and things, and specifically I think about the disease triangle or host plants or things like that. And so the rotation serves to break that up, and oats is a really valid placeholder in that. So next slide. I want to talk a little bit about nutrient management. This is our table from our soil nutrient recommendation guide for oats. It's old. It is old. We've had to kind of focus more on corn and soybeans in our state, and sadly, oats kind of fell away, and we didn't do a lot of work on the nutrient requirements of oats to update it. But this is what we have, and it goes by soil test category for phosphorus and potassium, just like corn, soybeans, and wheat do. And it's based on yield goal, of course. Again, yield goal is not the yield you want, but the yield you can get. So if you don't have a history of oats in your rotation, you really, ask around the neighborhood and try to find out what oats are typically yielding in your neighborhood. And that would be a good place to start. So now the nitrogen recommendation, David is going to talk about that in the future. So here's our next slide. There is our current nitrogen recommendation. I would really discourage you from using it. It is in dire need of update. That coefficient there of 1.3 David's going to say we're really confident that that's too high. And also, if you look at the International Plant Nutrition Institute, which is no longer an organization, but I think a lot of their documents have been moved over to the Fluid Fertilizer, or the Fertilizer Institute, I guess I want to say. And they have a recommendation of 90. So if you measure 30 pounds in your soil test, you subtract that from 90, they're recommending apply 60. And David may talk about that a little bit, but this 1.3, our oats are really efficient users of nitrogen. There's our equations for phosphorus. If you have the Olsen test or the Bray test, those are also included in our soil nutrient recommendation guide, and then potassium as well down at the bottom. So at this point, we'd like to take a poll, and Matt is going to put up a poll concerning your nitrogen use, because we'd like to know where you're at. So if we could take just 20, 30 seconds, if you could just choose, if you're an oat grower or if you know somebody that grows oats and you know what they apply, please answer as well. We're just interested in a general survey on this question. So when we take that down, David will take over again, and the rest of this about his nitrogen work and plant growth regulator work is very, very interesting.
Okay, I'm going to end this poll. I think all the interested folks voted for this, and yeah, like expected, close, almost 70% of all of you who answered the question, said 50 to 100, and that's what we expect it to be. And let's talk more about the nitrogen, fertilizer rate that we have done. This is a study that started in now I can't move my slide. Matt?
If the slide isn't moving, maybe
No,
stop.
it
Okay.
did. It did. Okay. So Anthony kind of made a good segue for this, and why this topic. And current fertilizer recommendation, like, we have 1.3 as a coefficient, multiplier to the yield goal. And after talking to several oat producers, when I first came to Extension, I realized that nobody is really using it, and we thought it's pretty high, and it needed some kind of revisiting or recalibrating this number. And that's where the effort came from. And so and then also we decided there is something called plant growth regulator. Its common name, brand name is Palisade. A lot of you folks probably know this name, Palisade. That's a plant growth regulator, shortens the plant height and increases the standability of the plant and prevents lodging. And we wanted to use plant growth regulator in our study as an added variable because oat tends to lodge more than other small grains that we grow. And this is only recommended or labeled for small grains out there. Label rate is 10.5 to 14.4 ounces per acre with at least 10 gallons of water. And at least the label says you can apply anywhere from, it has a really flexible window, Fix 4, that is when your tillers are all formed, all the way to second joint, that's Fix 7, crop growth stage. And we'll talk more about this. I started in 2016, due to some limited funding and limited resources. I was only able to do one site, that is the Northeast Farm, close to Watertown where I'm stationed in 2016 and 17, just one site, one trial per year. And both years, this is something important I would like to reiterate, and both years we tank mix this Palisade with herbicide, Bronate, at Fix 4 or Fix 5, somewhere in there, growth stage, and that means early in the season, because it's labeled for it, or stated that we could do it. And in both years, we didn't see any significant yield response to nitrogen, but not with the plant growth regulator. Both years we did that. But with the growth regulator, we didn't see any of the growth regulators effect in height or lodging or anything else. And that made us even more curious. Why is it doing that? So that brought in 2018, with additional resources from South Dakota Nutrient Research and Education Council, we're able to expand this project to multiple sites per year. So since 2018, it has been tested at least 5 sites, per year. And each year at 2 locations, Northeast and Southeast Farm, we've used Palisade as an added variable. And in rest of the farmer cooperatives field, we only used nitrogen as our treatment variable. So here's something from 2016. The variety was used, horsepower is used, and highest yield that year we achieved in Northeast Farm was 157 bushel with 120 pounds nitrogen. So that brings this 1.3 coefficient down to 0.76. And that's for the highest yielding for that year, for that location. And there's no significant effects of PGR on plant height. And so we didn't gain much by adding 20 pounds nitrogen, right? So 120 bushel, you got 157, that kind of plateaued. 140 bushel, 140 pounds, and only gave you extra 2 bushel. So this is 2017. Again, we're only trying one site that year. And I didn't run any trend line like this for this particular year. That the average data points were kind of in places that I was not expecting, but still variety horsepower did 104 bushel with 100 pounds N, and it took a little more N that year because it was very, very dry. 2017 at the Northeast Farm where we tried this trial. And now 2018, again, this year we had other locations also, but I'm going to show you the Northeast Farm. And we used variety Hayden. And the reason for different varieties at different places is we didn't want to impose our producers out there, in the farmer cooperatives that I had tested this field. And also, I didn't want variety to be the factor. And highest yield was observed for 0N, that means check plot, with no Palisade. And so that means the soybean that we had in the previous year in this field and some of the residual soil nitrogen we had was enough to produce the maximum yield in that particular year. And if you proportion that out, that multiplication factor becomes 0.6 in this particular year. And this is the height, and you can see no Palisade is taller, somewhere in excess of 40 plus inches, and Palisade we're able to, and these are the shorter. This Palisade was about 4 to 6 inches shorter than the no Palisade plot, so we're able to reduce the height. And here's the lodging number in 2018 at Northeast Farm. No Palisade plots were lodged more, and Palisade plots were lodged less. So we're able to prevent some lodging and height reduction by applying Palisade. So 2018, these are farmer cooperatives field. Only nitrogen amount were applied. We didn't test any Palisade in these fields. These are most of a location difference in yield. So we had Arlington as the highest yielding site that year, then followed by Salem, and Aurora was the last one. That Aurora we had 2 really strong storms, later in the vegetative stage, and that just flattened everything out there that year. So that's, it was very, so that's why it's the less yielding in that year. 2019, Northeast Farm yield. And we had about 80 pounds N available, before putting the trial in, 40 pounds for soybean and 40, soil, residual N. And highest yield was 118 bushel with 40 pounds applied N. And height, the same way, we're able to reduce the height by applying palisade all the way up to 10 inches this year. 2019 farmers field, only nitrogen nitrogen variable were tested. And you have Garrettson and you have Aurora. Garrettson were a little lower yielding than Aurora that year. In 2020, we were able to push our site from not only to I-29 corridor. This chamber is Chamberlain, or close to Chamberlain, anyways. So we had 3 sites, farmer site in 2020. In addition to Northeast and Southeast Research Farm, were Chamberlain, Garrettson, and Aurora. These are the numbers. Chamberlain had corn stubble this year. That was the unique one, and yielded the best overall. These 2 sites were very heavily moisture deficient. And by all that being said, so these are the 65 points, data points from 11 site years I had, and I just threw that out there and see how those plots scatter in a graph. And if I were to see a trend, there is no trend almost. Straight, there's no response to applied nitrogen at all. So I'm just eyeballing it. There is no statistics in here. If I were to put this line somewhere in here, it'd be pretty safe to say, after about 90-ish, we're not gaining much. And in most cases, the check plots were equal or thereabout with other nitrogen applied plots. So each point is average of 3 replications in that site in that year. So if that makes sense. So we had 3 replications for all of our trials every year. So conclusion is more N is needed to produce a bushel of grain in a stressful environment. PGR was useful to reducing lodging and reducing harvest loss in that case, and if you're doing on a field scale. And it's safe to say that current nitrogen recommendation for oats is likely higher than required and needs recalibration, and it does. Like Anthony said, some of the data that's used to produce that recommendation in our book that's currently available is kind of old. It's kind of safe. This is still ongoing and it's already funded for 2021. But if somebody asks me, I would say somewhere in between 1/7 of a pound to 1/9 of a pound per bushel of grain. And we also tried the dose and timing of palisade. What time is the best time to apply palisade? Because first 2 years we didn't see any effect of palisade when we're applying, early in the season with tank mix with herbicide. So this is the 2017 and 2018 data. 2017 was done in Garrison. 2018 was Southeast Farm. So these Fs are fix 6, control, fix 5, and then we even split the application. You had rate 7.5 ounces, and same rate. Went back to the same plot, another plot, and did twice. When you see fix 5 and fix 7, that means we applied twice. And we went all the way up to 21 ounces, which is not labeled. So we don't recommend to do that. We just did it just to see, in a research plot. So that's kind of, without going all of these numbers, look at the height and lodging and then height. If we combine all of these 3, so here's some pictures. This one is at least 1.5 foot difference between control. This is control, and this is 21 ounce applied later in the stage, F7. So without what I was trying to say, without going to all of these numbers, if you were to find a happy medium, I think going with, it's labeled for anywhere from 10.5 ounce to 14.4 ounce. So 12 or higher, and if you can catch it around like fix 6, that would give you the best results or at least that we have seen so far. And effects on grain quality, we are also interested if they're applying palisade and applying more nitrogen or less nitrogen, was doing anything with the grain quality. So we sent all of our samples to General Mills Laboratory and Brookings campus, and without, you know, and I just wanted the General Mills to test whatever they would test for normally in their grain samples. So these are the things tested: protein, plump oats, mid oats, thin oats. These are the parameters that General Mills usually test, you know, in a standard test they have, and what these mean. And we did not see any negative effects or any kind of response by, you know, by the palisade. And in at least one or two locations out of all of these sites we've used, nitrogen did bump that, you know, seed protein, this NI, the seed protein content a little bit. And we're in the end of our talk, and I would like to acknowledge South Dakota Nutrient Research and Education Council, NREC, for funding the project since 2018, and it's still ongoing. And I think we can pull all the data together after we're done with 2021, and then and have some kind of consensus, you know, among all of us, and say, you know, and we can put some numbers, that multiplication factor, and have a good recommendation for oats on our fertilizer recommendation guide. And here's my contact information. I'm based out of Watertown office, and office number, my email anytime. And most of you, if you have my cell number already, feel free to call, share that cell phone number. It's open to public. I would like to, you know, visit with anybody and everybody out there who are interested in oats, or in general, in, you know, or other crops in general. And I think Matt is going to put out a poll, which is, you know, about, you know, about your thoughts about our content and presentation today.
Thank you, David. That was great. Lots of good work there. Lots of hard work, and very well done.